Hello, fellow Star Trek fans. Do you love watching Lower Decks as much as we do? The show that makes us laugh out loud with its crazy antics, witty references, and unexpected twists? The show that shows us what life is really like for the unsung heroes of the Federation? The ones who clean the holodecks, fix the replicators, and deal with all kinds of weird aliens? Think you already know it all? Well, we're here to challenge that notion, my friends. Prepare for a wild ride through the wacky corridors of Star Trek Lower Decks as we unravel mysteries, unveil hidden Easter eggs, and share insider info that'll leave you saying, Klingons on the starboard bow. This is fascinating. Because in this video, we are going to blow your mind with 10 things you didn't know about Star Trek Lower Decks. Number 10. Lower Decks has a spin-off podcast. Now hold on tight because here's an intriguing tidbit you won't want to miss. Did you know that Lower Decks has an exciting spin-off podcast called Star Trek The Pod Directive? And guess who's at the helm as the host? It is none other than the talented Tawny Newsome, the very voice behind Ensign Mariner on the show. But that's not all. She is joined by the hilarious comedian and actor Paul F. Tompkins, who also happens to be a massive Star Trek fan. Together, Tawny and Paul dive into captivating interviews with a fantastic lineup of celebrities and passionate fans, all sharing their profound love for Star Trek, with guests ranging from the legendary Ben Stiller to the awe-inspiring Michelle Yeoh, the brilliant Tig Notaro, the thought-provoking Riza Aslan, and even the iconic William Shatner himself. This podcast is an absolute treasure trove of insightful and entertaining conversations. Number 9. Lower Decks voice actors ad-lib their lines. Now, you won't believe this. One of the reasons why Lower Decks is so funny is because the voice actors often improvise or ad-lib their lines, adding more humor and personality to their characters. The show's creator, Mike McMahon, encourages this kind of creativity and gives the actors a lot of freedom to play around with the dialogue. Sometimes they come up with jokes or references that are even better than what was written in the script. For example, in the episode Veritas, where Rutherford is being interrogated by a Romulan officer, he says, "I'm sorry" in Vulcan instead of Romulan. This was not in the script, but Eugene Cordero, who voices Rutherford, thought it would be funny to mix up the languages. Number 8. Lower Decks animation style is influenced by anime, comic books, and video games. Now this one will surprise you. The show's animation is influenced by anime, comic books, and video games, and it allows for more dynamic action scenes and alien designs than live-action shows. The show's animation studio is Titmouse, which is known for its work on shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Venture Brothers, and Big Mouth. The show's art director is Barry Kelly, who has worked on shows like Futurama and Disenchantment. The show's character designer is Romain Bouchard, who has worked on shows like Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites. Together, they create a vibrant and colorful world that pays homage to Star Trek lore while also adding their own flair and imagination. Number 7. Lower Decks music is composed by Chris Westlake. Now, you won't believe what you're about to hear. Lower Decks may be a comedy show, but it also has a great musical score that captures the spirit and emotion of Star Trek. The show's music is composed by Chris Westlake, who has worked on movies like Transcendence and TV shows like Castle Rock and Resident Alien. Westlake incorporates elements from previous Star Trek composers such as Alexander Courage, Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner, and Michael Giacchino into his music, creating a familiar yet fresh sound that blends orchestral and electronic instruments. Westlake's music adds depth and drama to the show's comedy and action scenes. Number 6. Lower Decks pays homage to classic Star Trek episodes and movies. Keep watching as we still have more. Lower Decks is a show that loves Star Trek history. The show features many references and Easter eggs to classic Star Trek episodes and movies such as The Trouble with Tribbles, The Naked Time, The Wrath of Khan, and The Final Frontier. Some of these references are subtle, such as the names of ships, planets, or aliens that appear on the show. Others are more obvious, such as the scenes or dialogue that are directly lifted or parodied from the original source. For example, in the episode Crisis Point, Mariner reacts to the famous scene from The Wrath of Khan, where Kirk screams, "Khan!" after Spock's death, but with her own twist. Number 5. Lower Decks main characters are based on Star Trek lore. Yes, Lower Decks cast of characters are also based on archetypes from Star Trek lore. Each of the 4 main characters represents a different aspect of Star Trek's philosophy and culture. Mariner is a rebellious Kirk-like figure who values freedom, adventure, and intuition over rules, order, and logic. Boimler is a by-the-book Spock-like figure who values duty, discipline, and rationality over fun, emotion, and creativity. Rutherford is a tech-savvy Scotty-like figure who values engineering, innovation, and problem-solving over socializing, romance, and leisure. He is also a cyborg who has a Vulcan implant that affects his emotions and personality. Tendi is a curious Crusher-like figure who values science, medicine, and exploration over violence, conflict, and danger. Number 4. Lower Decks parodies typical Star Trek openings. Now this one is unbelievable. Lower Decks has a unique title sequence that parodies typical Star Trek openings. Instead of showing the Cerritos exploring boldly and encountering wonders and mysteries in space, the title sequence shows the Cerritos getting into various mishaps and avoiding conflicts instead of facing them. For example, the Cerritos flies away from a giant space creature instead of studying it. It gets caught in a Romulan neutral zone trap instead of avoiding it. It gets shot at by Klingons instead of negotiating with them. It crashes into an ice planet instead of safely landing on it. And it gets sucked into a black hole instead of escaping from it. The title sequence also features a dramatic orchestral theme composed by Chris Westlake that contrasts with the comedic visuals. Number 3. Lower Decks writers use a crazy technique to create funny stories. Lower Decks is a show that uses a technique called reverse engineering to create funny stories. This technique involves starting with a funny premise or situation and then working backwards to justify it with Star Trek logic and lore. For example, in the episode Moist Vessel, the writers wanted to have a scene where Mariner gets promoted to lieutenant against her will and then tries to get demoted back to ensign by doing outrageous things. To make this happen, they had to come up with a reason why Captain Freeman would promote Mariner in the first place. They decided that Freeman would do it as a way to punish Mariner for her insubordination and make her miserable. They also had to come up with a reason why Mariner couldn't just resign from Starfleet or transfer to another ship. They decided that Mariner would stay on the Cerritos because she secretly loves her friends and her job. Number 2. Lower Decks features many talented voice actors. Now, Lower Decks is a show that features many talented voice actors who bring their characters to life. The main cast includes Tawny Newsome as Ensign Mariner, Jack Quaid as Ensign Boimler, Noel Wells as Ensign Tendi, and Eugene Cordero as Ensign Rutherford. They are joined by Don Lewis as Captain Freeman, Jerry O'Connell as Commander Ransom, Fred Tatasciore as Lieutenant Shax, and Gillian Vigman as Dr. Tiana. The show also features many guest stars from other shows and movies, such as Paul Scheer as Lieutenant Commander Billups, June Diane Raphael as Billups' mother, Jason Mantzoukas as Lieutenant Commander Jet, J.G. Quintal as Lieutenant Commander Steve Stevens, Tim Robinson as Lieutenant Commander O'Connor, Jessica McKenna as Ensign Barnes, Ben Rogers as Lieutenant Commander Stevens, Nolan North as Command Ensign with accelerated growth and reverse aging, Carrie Walgren as Anabaj, Paul F. Tompkins as Dr. Miglimo, and Carlos Alazraqui as Les Buenamigo. Wow, and now the drum roll for the number 1 entry on our countdown. Number 1, Lower Decks was created by Mike McMahan. Now keep watching as this will take you on a whole new ride. Lower Decks is a show that was created by Mike McMahan, who is also the showrunner and executive producer. Mike is a huge Star Trek fan who grew up watching The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. He is also a comedy writer who has worked on shows like Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites. He got his start as a writer for Rick and Morty after creating a Twitter account called TNGS8, where he posted fake plot summaries for a hypothetical 8th season of The Next Generation. His tweets caught the attention of Rick and Morty co-creator Justin Roiland, who hired him as a writer for the show. McMahon pitched his idea for Lower Decks to Alex Kurtzman, the executive producer of the Star Trek franchise, who loved it and gave him the green light to make it. McMahon's goal for Lower Decks was to make a show that was both funny and respectful of Star Trek's legacy and canon.